It sounded like a lot of praise, but you notice she kept mentioning about how old I am, how long I've been in one place. I swear to God, I'm not yet in a nursing home or playing lawn bowls. So this is really about 3 studies, or 3 or 4 studies, and there have been a team of people involved in these studies at various times. So that's the first slide, but there will be more besides. And I really don't want to understate the contribution that the staff in the Bureau have played. They've been a fantastic group to work with, and I'd love them all to have been here if they could have, if any would come to the party, put it in the airport. Okay, many of you I know will be familiar with the lockout laws, but some of you may not be, so I'll just give you a little bit of background if you're not familiar with it. So the background to it is on New Year's Eve 2013, a guy called Daniel Christie was killed in a one-punch assault in King's Cross. That had happened a year after another young man, whose name escapes me, had also been killed in a typical one-punch assault. At the time, it's probably worth noting the assault rate in Australia was starting to come down. Had been coming down in New South Wales since about 2008, and nationally showing signs of coming down. So it was just another one of those crises of crime at a time when crime was actually on the way down. But it caused an enormous furor, as you can imagine, and on January 2014, the then Premier O'Farrell announced restrictions in the King's Cross and CBD entertainment precincts, which are neither the suburb nor the local government area. I'll show you what they are in a minute. But the key elements of the restrictions were 1:30 a.m. lockouts in these areas, so if you're in, you could stay in, but if you wanted to get in, you couldn't after that point. 3 a.m. cessation of alcohol service. At that time, in King's Cross especially, but elsewhere, there were 24-hour trading. A freeze on new liquor licences, a ban on takeaway alcohol sales after 10 p.m. across the state as a whole, and the extension of orders banning troublemakers. So it was a package of reforms, although most of the media attention tends to be given to the lockout itself. The questions we were interested in at that time were whether or not it reduced the incidence of assault in King's Cross and the Sydney CBD. The government was so nervous about the Bureau doing this work, it set up its own unit in Treasury to do it, but we had the data, so we made sure we did the evaluation before they got a chance to look at it. It's an interesting side story, actually, because it just shows the importance of having technical expertise combined with subject matter knowledge, because they had the technical expertise but not the subject matter knowledge. And when they did their analysis, this is a complete digression. They did their analysis, they concluded that the lockout had produced a 600% increase in prostitution, and that's because the police, when they had nothing to do, were arresting sex workers. It's a good illustration of the importance of actually knowing the subject matter you're dealing with. You all look a bit bedazed by that. This is true. I'm not making it up. Anyway, second question was, is there any evidence of displacement? And whether the reduction in assaults in King's Cross and the CBD was larger than the displacement. In other words, whether there was a net reduction in assaults. And did the reduction in violence coincide with the timing of restrictions, that is to say the 1:30 lockout and the 3 o'clock closing? Now, we had done an earlier study, which I'm not going to drag you through because it had very limited follow-up. So this is the second study we've done. Now, this is where I mentioned nice things about Tanya's secrecies, even though she said troubling things about me. Tanya's done an enormous amount of work in this area, and she gets the same results whether she's the lead author or Kim Stockwell's the lead author, which is, I think, validation of the findings, which is that assault frequency increases when trading hours are relaxed. Well, it's the new standard for validating research when you're working with someone. You both publish and you switch the names around to see if you get the same results. Previous studies have also found that assault frequency decreases when trading hours are reduced, and there's some of the studies which have shown that. Kipri, who I think you had here last week or the week before, had done that study in Newcastle. Newcastle was the start of this whole lockout progress. He had Hamilton as his control site, big reduction in assaults in Newcastle, where I think there were 14 pubs that closed down, and no change in Hamilton. So it's a lovely difference in difference type study. So we found initial results in the first study, but that only had 8 months worth of follow-up. So the second study extended the follow-up period from 8 to 16 months. You've missed the exciting bit, although I feel like you have. So we had 78 months of pre-intervention and 16 months of follow-up. And what we were interested in specifically was whether or not there were changes in the relevant time period. So we broke it up into a period of 6 p.m. to 1:30 when the lockout started, and 1:30 to 3 a.m, which is when the closing started, and then 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. And obviously what we're expecting is that we'll get significant reductions in assault in periods 2 and 3, but not necessarily in period 1 when there was no lockout law. So if you like, it's another way of kind of strengthening the argument about cause and effect. So the strategy was to compare trends in assault in King's Cross and the CBD entertainment precincts before and after the reforms, and compare that with trends in assault in areas where the restrictions don't apply. So we had what we call the proximal displacement area, which is a sort of ring of suburbs around the Sydney CBD entertainment district and around the King's Cross entertainment district. Then we had what we call the distal displacement area, or DDA, which is the known hotspots for alcohol-related violence prior to the lockout. That's Newtown, Double Bay, Bondi Beach, and my own suburb, Coogee. I just note that I made no contribution to the alcohol-related area. So we're also interested in trends in assault in New South Wales. Now, that's the best picture I can give you of it. So I'm colourblind, so this always gets awkward for me, but that's meant to be red. Is that all right? I like that.
You're supposed to do that.
How do I do that?
Never happen again.
Anyway, that's the King's Cross entertainment. Does that look red? Oh! This is cool. I knew Anna would organise something. Anyway, I'm not going to touch it because it's big enough. That's the King's Cross entertainment precinct. It's quite small. Does that look red?
Yes.
Oh, cool. But it doesn't look any difference to this to me. Anyway, this is the Sydney, the blue or purple, whatever it is, I don't know. Blue or purple? Blue. So that's the Sydney CBD entertainment precinct. This yellow bit here is the proximal displacement area. And this bit, well, God, I've got to make it go back now. That's Newtown. It's so good. I love this.
We didn't know we had this function, but we like it. We discovered it.
Oh, this is so good.
Show us where you live,
So I live around about here. Oh no, there, right there. Just a little house, but it's very close to the beach. Anyway, so that's one area. And that's Bondi Beach, obviously. That's a problem area. Double Bay where the rich get drunk. And somewhere down here, where did it go? Newtown, which is also a red hotspot. So they were our distal displacement areas, and if they couldn't go to the proximal displacement area, we thought they'd go over to those areas. As it turned out, we were completely wrong. They went to the casinos, but I'm coming to that. So, oh no. This is not going to work. Oh my God. Maybe if I click it.
Yeah, masterful.
Methods. Okay, so don't ask me any questions about time series structural models. I got to Box Jenkins and I'm quite comfortable there, but we had a wonderful statistician, Patricia Menendez, who got tired of looking at global warming, decided to look at crime. So she introduced us to these time series structural models which separate, I'm just reading now, the time series into components, trends, seasonal variation and random variation. The thing I could never get my head around, Tanya, I know that you care about these things, is the idea of varying slope and intercept. Maybe when I finish you could stand up and explain that. Anyway, the graph will make it abundantly clear even if the maths is obscure. So she assumed that the assaults follow a Poisson process and checked that. Probably they don't actually because of this autocorrelation over time, but she was happy with it. And so they had a term measuring the effect of the intervention in terms of capturing pre-existing trends, because remember that assault is coming down at this stage, seasonal variation and residual. So that's the clear picture which everybody can understand. This is the situation for King's Cross. So you can see it starts to decline before the lockout occurs. The lockout's the vertical line, but you can see that it seems to accelerate after that point. I'll show you the stats results in a second. But a pretty dramatic drop. Probably worth keeping your eye though on the numbers here, because although King's Cross gets all the attention, the Sydney CBD number of assaults is much higher, as you just said now. So that's the fitted trend for the Sydney CBD entertainment precinct. You see a steady decline and then a sharp drop thereafter. And the overall results, so what you've got here is all the coefficients are in the right direction except for the control area, which is pretty much what you'd expect. So there are significant reductions in King's Cross, Sydney CBD. On the right-hand side, you've got the size of the change, which is ginormous. 45% reduction in King's Cross, 20% reduction in the Sydney CBD, no significant change in the proximal displacement area or the distal displacement area, and a tiny change across the state as a whole. Naturally, of course, the government claimed success with the lockout at the bottle shop trading hours for the 1.4% reduction, but it didn't last. So now the question, this is the weekday results, and the crucial thing to watch here is the timing of it. So in King's Cross, you're getting a 59% reduction between 6 p.m. and the start of the lockout. That's not what you would expect, because nothing has changed at this point. You're getting no change between 1:30 and 3 o'clock, and then from 3 o'clock on you're getting another very big change. Sydney CBD behaves just as you would have expected. No change in the incidence of assault between 6 p.m. and 1:29 a.m. Am I going too quickly? Everything okay? Then a big change, 47% drop between 1:30 and 3, and the pub's shut at 3 o'clock, and you're getting another significant change. No significant change in the proximal displacement areas in any of these. The 1, 2 and 3 refer to the time periods. No significant change in any of those time periods. So why the change in King's Cross? Well, principally because people just stopped going. If you look at the transport stats, the rail interchanges, you see that there was an enormous drop in the number of people actually going to King's Cross. We don't have transport data for the Sydney CBD, or we weren't able to get it, but at the very least it looks consistent with what you'd expect if the causal mechanism were the package of reforms, without being able to identify the specific element of those reforms which did it. So here's the weekend results, same sort of story. You're getting sizable reductions in King's Cross in all three time periods, regardless of whether or not the lockout has started or the closing has started. Sydney CBD, no change before the lockout, but substantial reductions, 31% and 42% in the second and third time periods after the lockout, then after the closing, and no significant change in the displacement area. So much for that. Everything we thought had been put to bed until the media started saying there'd been problems in Piedmont, in the casino. Now, the casino was the only area, which is actually part of this whole process, that the government exempted from the lockout laws. So you may well ask, why did they do that? I think they were wondering the same thing when they saw the results. So we thought we'd have a look at this. And this is work, I haven't got his name, Neil led this work. Neil Donnelly is an old friend of NDRI and has worked with NDRI at one point in time. Now works with us, wonderful guy. And one of the best things about him is that his time series analyses I can understand, because they're Jenkins, which I must say I was introduced to by none other than Tanya Sikis, poor thing. Okay, so there were reports in the media that the casino was showing signs of trouble, so we decided to conduct a third analysis looking at whether assaults had increased in and around the Star Casino. That's where the Star Casino is. So this is Sydney over here, Sydney CBD over here. That's the walkway across Darling Harbour. It's the old bridge. Familiar with it? So this is the precinct they defined as their domain of responsibility. So their staff take responsibility for whatever goes in that area. And that's the area where we were counting assaults, either in the casino, most of which actually happened in the casino, or within that bounded area there. So the method's interrupted time series, the REMA modelling. We've got 66 months of pre-lockout and 22 months of post the lockout. And we had, as usual, binary terms to capture the influence of the monthly variation, and a term capturing the underlying trend, and a binary term capturing the independence. This is the graph, King's Cross. Notice small numbers here. Anyway, it's bubbling along until the lockout, and suddenly it jumps up. So the media suspicion was correct. There was an increase in Darling Harbour, and you got an additional, it's not a huge effect, you got an additional 2 assaults per month out of that displacement effect. Obviously the 2 additional assaults per month is tiny compared with the reduction that occurred in Sydney CBD and King's Cross CBD. So the net gain, this is doodly squat when it comes to judging the net effect on assault of the lockout reforms. So what's been happening since? Many of you will have known that story up to that point. So Hamish Thorburn and I decided to have another look at this. So this is the whole period now, from January 2009 right through till June this year. and that's the King's Cross Entertainment Precinct. You can see that that substantial drop has been sustained over that period, and that's the result. So there's an underlying trend, negative coefficient significant, a general decline going on, but there's a very sizable level change at the point of the lockout. So you're getting 13 fewer assaults per month. No trend change and no seasonal effect. This is the situation for the CBD. Do remember though, I mean, that looks like a more gradual change or less substantial change, but if you have a look, that's going from what looks to be around about 40 to around about 10. So you're going from around about 170 or 80 down to around about something like that. But the change is obvious. The thing to notice though is that there's some evidence of a slight rise after the lockout. It certainly dropped down, but it looks like it's rising, and the evidence suggests that's true. So you've got this overall declining trend, and you've got a level change, big level change, but you've also got a trend change, and because the coefficient is positive, it means you're slowly rising up. It's not a big effect, and it's only borderline significant, but it's certainly something we're going to look at. There's the situation for the proximal displacement area. It's obviously gone down. In fact, the curious thing here, I'm interested to get people's comments on this, is you've got the underlying trend, but the curious thing here is this trend change. No level change, but a trend change, and it's positive. So it looks like it's slowly starting to rise up again. And that's the situation for the distal displacement area. You wouldn't think it, looking at it, that there was anything significant going on here, but there is the underlying trend, and there is a trend change, a positive trend change. So it looks like that distal displacement area, King's Cross, Redfern, Coogee, Bondi, particularly Newtown, and my suburb, Coogee, I think, are responsible for the bulk of that change. That's the situation in Star Casino. It's just gone from strength to strength. Not content with this, I don't know what happened there, but very sizable jump now in the CBD. This is in the context, by the way, political context of the government coming under increasing pressure to wind back the lockout laws, which they did by half an hour, but they're still under enormous pressure from business to change the rules regarding this. Anyway, so for the Star City, you've got a significant level change, another additional 3 assaults. Do bear in mind these are recorded assaults, so there may be many assaults that are not being reported to police. And that's the situation for the rest of New South Wales. So the underlying trend is down, and you've got a big level change and countervailing sort of trend change going there. So it's a complicated picture. It's not the neat and tidy picture it looked at first. And the thing that's come out of it for us is that there's no such thing as the effect of the lockout laws. It's a moving feast. So we really need to keep watching this. At the moment, we've got Kip Kippery, just given him data to do a further analysis of the trends that he's been interested in. I think he's working with Michael Livingston. Anyway, so in summary, did they decline in the target areas? Well, they did. Have they stayed down? This sort of question and answer thing, this is what politicians. It's nice and simple. Any displacement? Yes. Is there a net reduction? Yes. So the incidents did fall after the lockout laws, but we don't know the mechanism. It's possible people stayed but drank less, but it's also possible, particularly in King's Cross, that they simply stopped going. Either way, there's a reduction in assault. And we can't say for sure, being really strict about it, which element of the package generated it. So yes, of course, the trading hours was a key element of it, but there are also the orders banning troublemakers and adverse publicity, etc. Given the weight of evidence from other studies, particularly those conducted by Tanya and others, my view is that the driving mechanism is the trading hours. But Tanya's mentioned to me before that there are things like, for example, the what's that? Alco Pops change, which occurred when? 2008-ish. And there seems to have been, from Michael Livingston says, a general decline in alcohol consumption anyway among young people. Anyway, that's it. That's the funny bit. We all laugh.